All right, well, welcome to the Poetry Box Live. And our next featured poet, Wendy Colby, is the daughter of Joan Colby, the author of The Kingdom of Birds. Joan was a talented and prolific poet who was also an avid bird watcher. I was first introduced to Joan's poetry and love of birds in our first Poeming Pigeons anthology. Joan had published 22 books and was the editor for Future Cycle Press before succumbing last month to her sudden diagnosis of cancer. And we are very grateful and honored to have Wendy reading on her mother's behalf today. So please welcome our first reader, Wendy Colby.
Thank you, Shawn, and good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Special thanks to you, Shawn, and to Poetry Box for inviting me to this special Zoom reading today, and really for the honor of sharing some of my mother's poems with you from her latest collection, The Kingdom of Birds. As some of you know, and as Shawn just said, my mother passed away suddenly in August, just 6 months after my father's passing. She was writing poems until her very last days, scratching them out in a notebook. I would type them up for her at night, and I was amazed at how in command she was of her craft. No crossouts, no edits, the words chosen really exquisitely, the lines perfectly in place. And she even meticulously checked my work and to make sure that everything was correct. As Shawn said, my mother loved birds. She had bird feeders everywhere outside of her house, an old farmhouse built in 1874. On a parcel of land in a town called Plato Center. And interestingly, the town was initially founded with the name Homer. Such were, I'm sure that wasn't lost on my mother, and such were the wonderful surprises in this rural area where she spent more than 30 years of her life. She did love the Greek philosophers as well. And I like to say that sometimes I still go to her house to feed the birds, as I'm sure they are lost without her. So I'll share now a few poems from her book, The Kingdom of Birds. Hawks. The female redtail lurks high in the maple. Her mate soars low over our roof. She takes wing to join him, gracefully hunting some small creature with a pounding heart. How beautifully the raptors cruise November skies, like crosses dipped in blood. The rust-red semaphores warning of their imperial presence on shifting currents, catching the updraft to rise as high specks that hurtle earthward, where beneath the frost a field mouse huddles in its tunnel. We are attentive to blood, to what happens before our eyes, the little judgments that ground us. Two gulls. Walking the sun down like professional mourners into its beer of water, two gulls, one dark, one white, angle low along the cold wind, sweeping white caps over a threshold of rock. A woman tidying her house for night. The stars come on like lamps. The gulls settle on the beach, plucking bread from stones, their beaks quick and certain. They ride the swells, sleeping while we sleep, suspended in blackness, little and alone, snugged to our planet like fleas in a heaving vastness. The gulls wake us strutting at dawn into our dreams, cocksure and hungry. They grab and gulp the rind of everything, coming near enough almost to touch, but wary, measuring us with their shiny nail-head eyes, scoff and seize our scraps, flap heavily into the air and veer to a cairn of black rock, out beyond the breakers. The next poem is dedicated to her friend Kay Panfield, who I remember as a child and who lived two doors down from us. The painting of a pheasant, which you'll hear about in this poem in a moment, was done by her husband, and it still hangs in my mother's farmhouse. Pheasant, for Kay. The fat cock iridescent as taffeta, its scarlet eye patch, purple throat, green skull cap, brilliant copper breast fluted in black, small autistic amber eye posed against an imaginary snowbank. Flimsy shrub dangling 3 torn leaves, corn stubble to the right, and overall a layered lowering sky, infusions of presentiment. Later, the cat absconded with its plucked carcass. We laughed, such a minor deprivation. The painting was completed. You were still alive then. Exercising the thoroughbred in an October meadow, a pheasant flushed beneath his hooves. He reared straight up as if seized by the rapture, then came down sun fishing. I stayed on, like everything, mere luck. Fall morning shotguns echoed, flapping awkwardly out of cover into the sheen of death, into the soft retrieving mouths of dogs, particularly bred. For years vanished coyotes, we heard, or some disease. Then in yesterday's snowstorm, ornate as the one in the painting, a cock marched down our lane with strict military measure, a lone soldier of fortune, leaving its Trinity signature. I haven't forgotten you. Kay Panfield, she died of pancreatic cancer when she was 39 years old. This next poem is about my mother's father. She later told me she knew he had left this earth after the bird smashed against her window and she found it on the lawn. Again, you'll see here the beautiful metaphor of birds, and her father, as some of you may know, was an intellect, photographer, and engineer, and a great influence on her life. Flying against windows, 1. I wake to wings crashing into my window, repeated fury of tiny claws, beak, mirrored antagonist of our sleeping house. Tirelessly, a feathered fist slams against my dream. Here it comes again, kamikaze obsessed by the gods of reflection. It wants to liberate itself. You say I'm being silly. This happens every spring, assault of birds. I shut her face down into pillows. My father, 1,000 miles away, lies hooked to the machines of living death, his heart beating its feathered quest across darkened glass. 2. Later we find the robin in the grass lying peacefully, wings folded, eyes staring endlessly without blinking, like my father in his coma. The next poem has some of her requisite humor, a little different from some of the others here, called Wild Turkeys. The wild turkeys bustle around our campsite like a congregation awaiting a sermon, restless and seeking, like ants preparing a holiday dinner. Oh, irony, how often turkey, the brainless white domestic variety. These turkeys are trim and active. They roost in trees like librarians overseeing the stacks, the tents in which sleepers turn, bagged in butchered dreams. The turkeys peck the leavings of campfires. They hurry here and there in composite identities. There's something knowing and canny in their small bright eyes. Ben Franklin insisted the turkey should be the national bird, but even the proponents of the exceptional prevailed. The modest turkeys plunder beneath the picnic table, sweet and audacious as chatty neighbors who relish gossip, but are never unkind or predatory. With an apple, construction paper, and toothpicks, a child creates a turkey. It is a centerpiece for celebration. How people can come together in gratitude. The wild turkeys so trusting, so oblivious in this protected forest, like nuns in an abbey gathering for vespers. This next poem is one of my favorites in the collection, perhaps because I too am a bit of a dreamer, sometimes preoccupied, always thinking about something else. Maybe you are too. One red-winged blackbird. Yesterday's snow set a record for November. One redwing at the feeder, fluffed against the cold. The flock left in September for sunny resorts in Mexico or Costa Rica. The bird huddles as the feeder swings its copper hood. How did he miss the migration? Was he distracted, as so often I am, thinking of something other than the task at hand? Perhaps he overslept when the flock rose as one decision and lofted off on a south breeze. There's always one who is preoccupied, a dreamer contemplating the poetry of a cornfield, gleaning the easy pickings of the left behind. When the flock ascended like the rapture, this one failed to sign his wingtips against the cloud. In this next poem, the setting is the library, another place I remember well, the Gail Borden Public Library, where my mother was a patron for many years. And one of my favorite memories as a child with my mother was going to that library. And every week she would take out more stacks of books than she could carry. But this poem is not about a library, it's about bald eagles. Bald eagles. On the riverbank by the library, eagles can be seen fishing above the dam, white helmets flashing in the pale January afternoon, a light snow falling. Last fall we viewed eagles soaring above the Mississippi, crucified on such a blue palette our eyes burned. Watching eagles has become an industry. You signed up for the expensive tour and saw no eagles, just an abandoned nest in a dead tree, but that was something. On the great seal, the eagle holds 13 arrows and an olive branch. In its beak a scroll, E pluribus unum. You can see an eagle on the backside of every crumpled dollar bill. The eagles were endangered. Some blame hunting, some loss of habitat, some DDT. It's always something. Today, the eagles are flying and diving over the Fox River. fish like scrolls dangling from talons, and the word is hunger. The word is blood. Lonesome dove. Every morning the owl-like query requisitioning sunlight. The tree's long division finds them wanting, a negative number, a fraction of hurt, gray as Quakers on a quest for illumination to the lawns of those just waking. We are troubled by their petition, how they ask but never answer. We don't know either. This equation that suspends logic, it's querulous, patient, as a monk at the prie-dieu, waiting to be blessed with understanding. That morning means morning, somewhere for someone. Morning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, morning. Fugue with two crows. It is a morning in late winter, two crows alight on a topmost branch, unkempt as old trappers, their black ragbags clutched like stolen money. 3 months hard freeze, today a thaw. Further on, the river croons beneath its lazy coverlet of ice like a revived baby. It shakes a rattle of bone, abandoned child of cannibals. Every roof looses its frozen tear, so much pent-up feeling. The snow has grown ancient and gray with it. The crows overlook landscape, plunderers, looters. The windows of ice are cracking on every lake. The small fish cruising in gangs, learning the sense of grab, the rule of blood, how the willows bend into jigsaw water like native women whose sons wandered off, lured by the river goddess in her sinuous and fitful bed. A harsh cry stabs through the trees, stupor. The crows flap off into the sleep that begins its downfall of needles. What heavy birds, sad black hearts. The hinges of their wings seem to groan like the rheumatic branches. Even my eyes ache with the freight of their passing. Eulogy for birds. Grace note birds whirl in a puff of wind scattering over bare-armed trees to reflock along the rusting eaves. Distractions wheel me out of the glass eye into a web of dust. I am a clatter dangling from the nerve strings like thin-paned chimes telling a blown story. When I go back remembering some pattern of black feathers and quick beaks, I blink into vacant air that collapses on grids of houses squared by hedge or fence, embraced by curvilinear streets that wiggle nowhere. Spirit creatures. Wolf and raven are my amulets, loose in a dark wood, one howling, one cawing, hoarse, aggrieved, guttural with hunger. Blood on the moon, head thrown back, neck hair serrated as the long agonized cry splits the shadows where the raven croaks and flaps, a silhouette of ragged wish. Snow on the peaked roof of a cabin deep in pines where the lost children flee like everyone abandoned, like everyone terrified, as if the wolf or the raven were simply emblems, as if every story did not hinge on choice. Parrots. I'm to inherit the parrots. I've committed to the room where friendship has been caged for half a century. In the chair you bend over, staring at your shoes for weeks while the hole in the macula heals, as if gut shot you quiver, the birds squawking in protest. Built of titanium and steel, I cause entrances to clamor, knee wired to extinction. How did we arrive in this chamber of scalpels? We agree to burn the letters, embellished with a curse of children won't master. Their names like pickets. Nothing flows between the oar sweep of descenders, the flourish of signature. Now we punch delete, embrace the technology of symbols, dancing on the screens like birds of rapture. The parrots used to scream when the phone rang. You'd hide in the kitchen whispering, we promise never to judge. One parrot after another dies. You weep, sweeping up the feathers. How can I keep birds that could outlive us, birds that speak? The gray one says, I love you when he sees your face beyond the bars. Does he know what that means? To me, a stranger in the citadel of birds, the memories like shining trinkets. The parrots clamp their beaks on the golden wires. And this next poem too, to me, hits right at the heart. My mother, an only child, who always said she wanted a sibling, but that aloneness, that power of observation, I think gave her one of her greatest gifts. Sunday birds. A fledgling in the grass, perfectly still, staring skyward. I think of moving him, mowers later, a whisper of fluff. But he's fully feathered. The parents shriek and circle, so I reconsider. His sharp nail eye finds me, a sudden get this, and he launches up onto an oak limb. A celebration of robins. Was he their one and only? Like me, the designated child, genetic carrier of all their hopes. A big hawk over the pasture mobbed by crows. One aligns on his back, the red tail flashes as he soars. The crows don't falter, harrying him off into the higher reaches of his empire. So size and farsight can overcome the fury of the uprise. Peasants in ragged black cloaks, limited in intention. You have to admire the way they peck him. They'd hang him upside down like Mussolini. They'd dance and clap in the bombed out square. For now they are content with herding him from his lawful territory, a black crew of murderers. I can't decide whose side I'm on. Two more. This next poem is from her latest book, The Salt Widow. I thought I'd include one of those in here as well. The Salt Widow was really her final book, a memoir of grief for my father, which she wrote in the space of 3 to 4 months. And this poem, another red-winged blackbird appears, and this was written after my father died when she was alone in the farmhouse. Red-winged blackbird. The first redwing is at the feeder this morning, hauling spring northward, singing his territorial hymn. The juncos will be leaving. The cardinals who cohabited all winter will start dueling. Last night the dog woke me barking. The power was out. I heard there was a white flash when the substation blew, but I didn't see it. By morning, the house was cold. Every day is predicted to be warmer, as is the custom. I expect exceptions. Our first child was born in mid-April in the midst of a blizzard. The stats still stand. When I let the dog out, an abbreviated formation of Canada geese go honking over like a traffic jam. Their old migration stalled years back when they discovered retention ponds. Soon it will be the equinox, the time of change. And I was that child born in the April blizzard. And I read this last poem here, another favorite for me in the collection, simple, true, urge can be everything. It's called Nesting. Every year, cardinals persist in raising their young in the lowest furrow of a spruce. Along the road's edge, the lark has laid its clutch too close to the verge. Eggs in the mailbox, upon the lintel, in the graveled lane. Birds refuse to learn. We, on the other hand, have forgotten that urge can be everything. In summary, I'll say before my mother died, she held this book, The Kingdom of Birds, in her hands. And she always said she communicated best through poetry. She felt this book represented some of her best work. She called it her beautiful poems. In contrast to her last book, I also have it here, The Salt Widow, which was the memoir of grief to my father. One of her last dreams, she said when she was dying, that there were birds trapped under her bed. Could it have been her own body trapped? And later she said she was at peace and she felt like a bird ready to soar. As Shawn said, my mother published now 25 books of poetry in her lifetime and leaves a treasure trove of over 10,000 poems, and I'm still finding jewels everywhere, as I hope you will too. Thank you for your time. My mother would want everyone's words to soar. She'd like that. She's up there somewhere watching, I think now, with that keen nail eye of the birds in her poems watching. So thanks to you all. Thanks, Shawn, and I'll turn it back to Shawn.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. That was such a treat to hear your mother's poetry, and you did a beautiful job reading them. And I too, think that her poems will live on for a long time, not only on the page. All we have to do is look up, hear the bird song, and know she's with us. And she was such a special lady. I wish I had more time to have gotten to know her better. But I really cherish this book and her poems and her brief friendship with me through email. And thank you so much for sharing this with us.
And I know she valued that too, Shawn, so thank you.
So if you'd like to keep up to date with all of our shenanigans, go to thepoetrybox.com, where you can scroll down to the bottom of the page and sign up for our newsletter. Again, thanks for joining us today. Be safe out there wherever you are, and we'll see you next month.